Hi, I'm Tanea Everett, a pre-licensed professional at Restore, Rebuild, Reconnect, and I am going to want to talk about professionalism because it is a topic that is brought up and talked about daily. And it's been a topic of concern for me since I was conscious enough to know what professionalism is, because in the Western world, professionalism does not align with me as a person. And I found that it doesn't align when placed in the context of people of any demographic or cultural background, besides more of like that Western white standard. Um, and so it is important to see just how the standard of professionalism may take away what people have to offer or what they can bring to the table. And I'm hoping by the end of this presentation that I have assisted counselors, specifically Black women counselors, but also Black clients, and in a broader text, Black women, reflect on how our cultural identity shapes and challenges professionalism, which is mainly defined through that Western mold. So, we are going to unpack professionalism, but we're not going to do it through definitions and statistics. We can do that all day. We've done it all of our life, not just with professionalism, but in the context of anything that we've learned. It's a lot of definitions and statistics and reading and analyzing. But this is going to be a different presentation because we are going to go and learn about professionalism through the lived experiences of Black women. And so I pose these two questions here. You can pause the training if you need to, but I want you to reflect on your own ties to professionalism. I'd like for you to think about what comes to mind when you hear the word professionalism. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? And then I would like for you to go a step deeper and to think about if you yourself have a specific standard to professionalism. Do you think there's a standard to professionalism? Is it going through one pipeline, or is it like an array of ways to be professional? Um, and so for me, when I was younger, I always saw blazers and sleek hairdos and neutral tones as professional, sounding like a lot of yeses and very being like very frantic in the moment, but covering that up and also assuming that you know exactly what somebody wants off of one question or one um, statement, or I don't want to say demand, but one ask. And by living this way, it felt very performative and it felt like I was not bringing myself to the table. I was more detaching from who I was to be who they needed me to be or what they assumed I should be. And again, that was very harmful for my own development, not just professional development, but personal development as well. And so I'd like for you to keep in mind what you answered to the questions in the previous slide. But now we are going to talk about what I've realized we are being taught. This is going to be in the context of the workforce and the program that I'm in for counseling. And um, we are taught to have neutral tones and emotional restraint. Not neutral tones in the context of clothes, but neutral tones in the context of speech. And so we don't want to be too loud. We don't want to be too um, funny. We don't want to be too much of us. We don't want to bring too much of us to the table. And when we are in counseling, we're going to hear a lot of things that maybe we never experienced, we've never heard of, we can't believe, but we are taught to have emotional restraint. But as you can see throughout this presentation, I don't have a lot of emotional restraint when it comes to my facial expressions. If I hear something that is out of this world to me, it's going to show. But I can also use my words to say, okay, I don't mean it this way. And if I do offend the client or I do bring up a sense of like uncomfortability, I have to have that standard of, okay, how do I heal this rupture that I just caused? But I haven't had to experience that in a while. Well, I haven't experienced that at all. In context of clothing, being polished and conservative in your appearance is something that is also taught. We might think of blazers, like I said, button ups, those slacks that sway and swish as we walk, and them click clacky heels. I do love me a sound of a good heel, but wearing heels every day to be deemed professional is not something I'm going to do, no matter the context. It's not me. Um, Also having a clear separation of personal and professional life. So knowing when to draw the line of when you bring yourself to work versus when you don't. We all have heard of those that bring your child to work day, bring your pet to work day, bring this to work day, bring that to work day. But when are we going to have a bring ourselves to work day? We shouldn't need a day in order for us to bring ourselves. And in the counseling field, I have realized that being personable is key to be able to build a relationship. And so sometimes I am going to share a context of this is what I did this weekend. This is my favorite thing. I love this. I don't really like that. And it just brings another layer of me to the table when I'm working with clients, but also in a professional setting or my professional life, I'm able to intermix those. Whereas in the Western view, we need to draw the line here. Also, formal language and structure. I also added rigidity and repetition because going throughout the program and going throughout the workforce and just going throughout life, you see that you're supposed to just be there, be robotic, accept things as they are, don't really question them. Use the language that you learn in your handbook or in your trainings or in your program or in your readings. And essentially, all of these are feeding into that assimilation that we're taught. We're taught to be a specific way so that we can get to a specific place. But I want to read off the real definition of professionalism from Webster Dictionary, which is the conduct, aims, or qualities that characterize or a professional mark a profession or a professional person. But who gets to deem what is professional and what isn't? Right? So when we look at the definition, we can see that it's simple, easy, straight to the point, according to Webster. But when it is placed in the context that involves like multicultural populations, it's no longer simple or easy. And I explained that before I even read the definition. So in terms of how professionalism is embodied, it lacks that inclusivity of cultural backgrounds and norms. And so when I asked you to reflect on how professionalism is seen through your eyes in the previous slide, if you didn't feel like these 5 bullet points at the bottom of this slide suit your growth or your definition of professionalism, that means that you are actually redefining it. And that is okay. That's actually great. And that's what we want. And so, like I said, we're not going to focus on the definitions or statistics of professionalism and how we feel, how many people we feel align with that. I actually wanted to state a quote from one of the 6 women I interviewed, which you will hear and see a lot of their perspectives throughout this presentation. But this was an interesting concept to me, is that she is a therapist, and she said that she has worn crop tops to work with one client, but when another client follows up with that, she will wear a wrap. So for instance, she'll work with a teen, she'll wear a crop top. She'll work with a male, she'll cover up. And it might not be it she said it's not for her just the sake of it being a different gender, but it's more of like comfortability for herself and the client. And so in hearing this experience, that sound very far off from what I just read on this slide, right? Right. And so, going back to what I said, I had the pleasure of speaking with 6 Black women in the counseling world, from licensed psychologists to professional therapists, and all of them in between. And these women were the research, because whether we looked at Google or Wikipedia, or we read library books, or we break down peer-reviewed journals, the real information is in the lived and shared experiences that bring us back to our reality. So let's continue to see what's going on and see what they had to say. And I asked them a total of 3 questions, similar to that 2 that I asked you previously. But I'm hoping by the end of this presentation, your perspective has changed, or If it hasn't, it's stayed the same, but you've gotten some new information or ways to view professionalism. And I also learned a lot, and my view has stayed the same, but I've gotten perspectives from these women as well. So I asked him, just to start off, what does professionalism mean to you? And some of them said it's not about how you show up or how you look, but it's about your attitude, your energy, and how you treat people. It can also be meaning integrity, accountability, being present. It's not all about being perfect, it's about showing up consistently. It's about being versatile, being adaptable, being loud, funny, lit, classy, being and showing up as you. And so this slide rings true, something that may or may not have been in your thoughts. And I saw that none of these definitions talked about having the newest shoes, the sleekest hair, or having all the right answers. It was more about being relatable, being consistent, being adaptable, having respect for yourself and whoever you are working with or working around. And so, in that, we can see that we're already far off from the standard definition that we just reviewed in the previous slides. And so I moved on to a deeper context of including their cultural background by asking how has your cultural background influenced how you show up with clients? And some of them said that they grew up in a more conservative household. Others grew up with more flexibility. But all in all, it just seems like their cultural background has pushed them to see how showing up and being authentic has been great for their success or their growth. And so from these quotes, you can see that they acknowledge representation matters, and by being able to show up and allow others to see them for who they are, it allows for the clients to see and have that reflection of hope, understanding, possibility, but also recognizing that our clients are unique, and so are the people that we work with, so colleagues. And so professionalism is very, very different from session to session to event to event. And then also, I thought it was really cool that one of them, Dr. Tyson, we work so hard to be called doctor, but she is able to put an ego aside and give up the doctor title when she's working with clients to even out that power differential. And so she says that her background has taught her to make clients feel welcome and unjudged, which in doing so, it has allowed her to grow and see that, yes, she's worked hard for her doctor title, but also that doesn't that doesn't stop her from being able to see people for who they are, who may not have that doctorate title, or may not have lived in a world that she has lived in, which I thought was really insightful. So this third question, very similar to the question I asked in the beginning of these PowerPoint, but I've added the context of the Western standard. And so in reading their responses to this, a theme that I saw is that our definitions and the standard for professionalism do not align. And so, like I said before, I felt like I was out of body. Well, it can feel out of context to our worldview and our experiences. And it just feels like we can feel like the only way to get ahead or to be recognized is to become unrecognizable to ourselves. But from the responses on the slide, it is clear that we have much more to offer than that gold standard of professionalism. And so, in reading these, for example, the first one, pro, pro, traditional professionalism is very pro-white and anti-other. And so she says as long as her language and dress doesn't harm the client, she can show up authentically. I feel like that's very powerful. Professionalism isn't about shrinking to fit in. It's about showing up as my full self, prepared, confident, authentic. And then lastly, Western professionalism focuses on being neutral, detached, and overpolished, which might ring a bell from another slide. But her definition of professionalism is about warmth, intuition, and connection. And so the themes that I see in this response is that being authentic, being welcoming, being true to who you are and how you see things is going to get you further than trying to mold yourself into something that doesn't even fit your own standards for yourself. So, going further, and just reflecting on my own definition of professionalism, even you reflecting on your own, and then understanding and reflecting on the language that these professionals used about the word professionalism and how they apply it, I can say that I realized that first impressions do matter, but it's not just solely based on like the clothes we wear, how we do our makeup, how we do our hair. It's more about the impact that we make that keeps us booked, busy, and grounded. Also, the language and behaviors, we don't need to cause more strain on ourselves or develop another language barrier. And I don't mean like different languages not being understandable, but we are essentially creating a language barrier when we use a lot of clinical language or hard language that we've learned that is not easy to understand to our clients. That's also a language barrier. We don't need to create that. And then lastly, just the outlook of not only the responses, but the redefining of professionalism. And so I saw that presence matters over performance. Some days we can only just be there. We don't need to pretend that we have all the answers. We don't need to pretend that we know exactly what we're doing or we know it, we've learned about this, so we know exactly how to apply it. No. Sometimes we just need to be there for them. And we need to learn from our clients and we need to learn from the world so that way the things that we do learn can then be applied in contexts that matter or that make sense. We got another think tank. So I'd like for you to reread your previous definition of professionalism and think about how, if your view has shifted. And so, like I said way in the beginning, we think of professionalism as a word, but we can make meaning of words, right? As long as we show up and become our best selves, or at least be our best selves that we can in that moment, consistently and respectfully, I think that's professionalism. But I want you, whether you pause this or you already have the answer, how will you start to or continue to show up professionally after hearing all of this? From my definition, my experiences, to the other wonderful professionals that I interviewed and included their words and their responses on this PowerPoint, how can you redefine professionalism for yourself? So, how can we continue to redefine professionalism? Hmm. Well, there's a plethora of professional development trainings, books, podcasts, and other types of media that hone in on how to show up. Well, the most pioneering way to redefine professionalism is to stand firm in your own beliefs and who you are, while also being open to new information and understanding you don't need to know everything as long as you are willing to take the time to figure it out, ask questions, and understand things for as they are. That's professional. Also, understanding professionalism can include being flexible, being transparent, being graceful, not mixing your sugar and salt. So being aware of your flaws and things that you need to work on, but also recognizing your successes and things that you bring to the table. Also creating space that welcomes growth and authenticity, taking heed to environments and backgrounds and realizing like maybe professionalism doesn't have to look a specific way in all the environments, but we can switch. We can bring different parts of us to different areas that we need to. And also, there's no right way to be professional. There's no right way. So I wanted to say thank you to the six beautiful, wonderful women who assisted me in creating this presentation. While I did all the typing and slides, I wouldn't have been able to do this and give as much context and detail and deepen the conversation without their perspectives and what gems they brought and dropped. I wish I could fit all of everything they said into this presentation, but I just want to say that all of their responses really drove this conversation to be more than what I could ever just do by myself. So thank you. And thank you for also watching and taking time out of your day to learn and interact and just think about professionalism. Also, I did use Webster's dictionary. That's it. That's all I used. Oops, stop.